Let's paint some drop sentinels.
I've never seen you people. Tell me who you are.
Hello, I'm Marcel.
And I'm Mrs. Snakeworks. We have 6 sentinels built and primed black. Let's paint them.
Now my goal in this video is to paint these sentinels without using an airbrush. I'm getting fed up with faffing around with it, setting it up, cleaning it. You know the drill. But at the end of the day, let us know how you think we got on.
Our first colour will be black. We thin this down and paint the areas we missed with the rattle can primer. You can see on this one, I've missed the hole underneath. Terrible behaviour. With the black applied, it takes a while to dry, as it was quite wet. And wasn't that a band?
Was that Stuart Pearce on the drums?
Nobody really wants to see him miss it. And he hasn't. 3 out of 3 for England.
He smacked it in.
Our first actual colour is bronze green. Using a big soft brush, we give the sentinels a good covering of the bronze green. We thinned the paint down and gave it a couple of thin coats. Here's what they looked like after that layer. It's an interesting tone of green which should work well on our D99 vehicles.
We're trying to match the art of the sentinels from the Anphelion Project book. Let me show you. This is the book, and there's some art here.
Here we can see a D99 Sentinel. It's a green of which I can't describe, with some camouflage patterns on it. It does look really nice, but I don't think it's just your standard olive drab green.
How would you describe that green? Forest green? Pea soup green? Anyway, let's carry on.
Our next colour will be Russian green. I think it's probably called that because maybe it's the same colour as the Russian military uniform? Who knows? Now, somehow we either forgot to film it or lost the clip of us dry brushing the Russian green, so here's us applying the bronze green again. Here are the results of that first dry brush. It's lightened things up a lot, hasn't it?
The green is a lot more green now too. So with the base coats on, we can now move on to the camouflage.
The first camouflage colour is Vallejo Model Colour Black. Using a small piece of sponge, we then dab on some camouflage markings. We also thinned the black so it isn't overly stark. With those black patches applied, the first colour is done. We can now move on to the next one.
I originally thought maybe we should mask off the camouflage, but I wanted to keep things easy and simple. And you don't get much simpler than sponging. Well, maybe finger painting. But I find fingering them can sometimes get a bit messy.
The next camo colour is US Field Drab. Again, using our trusty sponge, we then apply the field drab in some small patches. We tried our best to make these patches a bit smaller than the black ones. We also had some on their own, and some of them were overlapping. Here's what the camouflage pattern looks like when it's dry.
Now I have to say here, sometimes we needed 2 or even 3 coats of the sponging, as we thinned the colours down quite a lot. Anyway, it's Decal time next, or Decal, Decal. How do you pronounce that word? Transfers.
To prep the surface for decals, we shall use gloss varnish. We thin the gloss varnish a little and apply a coat to where we want the decals to go. We are putting 1 decal on the side and 1 on the front. The gloss varnish takes a little while to dry. It's hard to tell, so it's best to leave it as long as possible.
We like to leave it overnight. It's the only way to be sure.
It's the only way to be sure.
Here are the decals we shall be using. Some Elysian D99 decals and some generic Imperial Guard vehicle decals.
We won't show you the transfer application process, as we've done a whole video on that before, which you can see up here somewhere. There's probably a link in the description below for you too.
Here you can see all the sentinels with their decals applied. They do look a little clean at the moment, but don't worry, we'll get that sorted out later. Next up, we need a final highlight colour, and we're mixing Russian green 1:1 with some pastel green for that. Using a dry brush, we apply the highlights to the Sentinels. We were very sparing with this and gently worked up the highlight as opposed to doing the opposite. Here are the results of that dry brush. It's really helped to bring the detail out. Also, the armour is now all base coated, camouflaged, decaled and highlighted, so now we can move on to the details.
I always prefer the base coating stage of painting, but a lot of people I know like the highlighting stage. So today's big question is, what's your favourite stage of the painting process?
It's time for some metal now, and the metal we shall use is gunmetal. Using the gunmetal, we then paint all the light housings. Well, I think they're lights. We also paint the grav chute exhausts. There's one up the front and two up the rear. We also paint the actual exhausts. This one has a cool sideways exhaust, unlike the standard Sentinel vertical version. Next up are the pistons on the legs, 2 on each side. And finally we paint their balls. These are what the feet rotate around, a ball joint.
We have to remember those moving parts will be a lot cleaner than the rest of the Sentinel. Those pistons are going in and out all the time. Well, unless they seize up, I guess. Seize the fritters!
How about a fritter?
Seize the fritters!
No, not the fritters, the pistons. Now, by the way, Gremloids, as that movie was known to us, was also known as hyperspace in the US, I believe. Not many people have seen that movie. I remember it being okay, but that was a long time ago. It's probably absolutely terrible, but still better than The Last Jedi, the worst movie of all time. Actually, no, Rise of Skywalker might have been even worse.
Next up is dark sea grey. I've never seen sea grey water, but I haven't been everywhere in the world. I've been to quite a few places, mainly Asia, and I'd like to explore Europe a little bit, but I don't think you guys really want to hear about that. We then highlight the black weapon casings using a very gentle dry brush. Blah. We absolutely despise edge highlighting black weapons, and we have found this method is a lot easier and more fun. Here they're all highlighted up. It's not as perfect as edge highlighting, but it doesn't put you off painting for the week. At arm's length, I think they look pretty good.
I'm always about finding better methods to get your effort to reward ratio better. Now, when it comes to painting, I prefer to use methods I enjoy, as opposed to slogging along with things that I don't. Things that I don't include things like edge highlighting and cleaning the airbrush. Can't stand it.
Okay, so we are working on some gold bits next, and the colour we shall use for that is Elven Gold from the Scale 75 Metal and Alchemy line. There were only these little aquillas that needed painting with the gold. Now, I normally don't like Scale 75 paints for general painting, as I find they don't have very good coverage, but these metallics are really nice. You can see it has a nice bright gold shine to it, a small piece that didn't take very long to paint at all.
What are your views on Scale 75 paints? I love the matte finish to some of them, and I'll show you that later. But the general feel of them and the consistency, it's not for me.
As you can see, our Sentinels are starting to come along nicely. I'm really happy with our progress so far. Time for a splash of colour now, and it will be Vermilion Red. I think someone once said that's got something to do with worms. Do any of you guys know? Using the Vermilion Red, we then paint all of the little hydraulic cables on the back of the knees. Well, that's what I assume these are. It's not the greatest covering paint, so we did need 2 thin coats. Here, you can see the Sentinels with the red applied. I think it goes really nicely with the yellow of the D99 logos. Now, recently Snakeworks Jr. and I saw this massive plane fly over when we were walking to the park. It looked like some sort of military plane to me. It was really low and really loud, although there is an airport nearby, so it was probably just landing.
If you are an aviation expert, then please let us all know what sort of plane that was in the comments below.
Stupidly, Marcel forgot we also have the roll cages to paint. For this, we went back to our gunmetal. We like this paint as it covers really well. Here are the roll cages with just one coat of the gunmetal, and for us as a base, that will be enough.
I find the Vallejo metallic range has really good coverage, while the air version and the metal colours, game colours and model colours, not so much. Especially the silvers too. I can't really say I've tried the golds, have you?
Yet again, we're back to the gunmetal. This time we are painting all the metal bits of the weapons. That includes the barrels and ammunition containers. Oh, and the occasional pipe.
Now, a friend and I often like to discuss what's the worst part of a miniature to paint. The finalists are usually marine backpacks and bolters, or bolsters as the autocorrect likes to call them. When it comes to painting bolters, I can see why people like to give their bolter casings a nice colourful colour, like a red or a white, as opposed to black. It's boring to paint.
Next up we have some Nuln oil. I know a lot of you are big fans of this stuff. We then give all the metal areas a wash with the Nuln oil, apart from the pistons on the legs. We leave those unwashed, a bit like the people I used to work with.
Now, we usually like to show you the results of the wash, but again we appear to have either lost or not taken the footage, and I do apologise for that.
Now what we have here are the crew. We have a whole video on how we painted D99 Elysian, so I feel we don't really need to repeat it. But if you want to see that, there's a link in the description below. With the crew painted, we just had to glue them in the Sentinels. We used Superglue for this. We tried to be careful so we didn't get any fogging.
Superglue can be a bugger for fogging. Does anybody actually know why it does it? Or even perhaps how to prevent it?
Now remember the roll cages? Well, we gave them a wash with the Nuln oil too. A very easy and simple step. When the washes were dry, we could glue them onto the Sentinels. Again, we used Superglue for this. And again, we were lucky there was no fogging. PVA would have probably been a safer option.
The worst ones are plain and flyer canopies. I always recommend using PVA glue to stick those in, because they look bloody awful when they fog up. Because you want them clear, and you can't really paint over them, unless you go for that hand-painted canopy sky look, which can look really good sometimes, or other times absolutely atrocious.
Gunmetal again. I'm surprised we have any of this paint left. Using the gunmetal, we then highlight all the metal areas we washed earlier with the Nuln oil, leaving the Nuln oil wash in the recesses. It's a simple method to paint metal fast.
I used to dry brush my metals back in the day, and I don't actually know why I moved away from that method. I might try it again sometime and see how it goes.
Another Vallejo metal, and this time it's chrome.
I'm the leader, Chrome Dome.
No, not you, Chrome Dome, just chrome.
We are the fearless warriors.
And that reminds me, we still need to do another Transformers crossover marine.
There's not much to paint with the chrome, just the pistons on the legs, leaving a little of the previous gunmetal in the ends of the pistons. With the metal bits all painted, that's probably the most boring step out of the way.
Next up, we're painting something I've never been able to settle on a recipe for. Lamps, or headlights, whatever you want to call them.
It's time for some white paint. This time we're using Vallejo. Using the white and our steadiest hand, we paint all of the glass parts of the lamps and lenses. We did our best not to get any on the metal mesh thing that goes over the top. It's not the easiest task in the world. Oh, there's also the little lens on the front of the canopy, your hull.
What do you call the main part of a Sentinel with the chair in? The cockpit? Or just the chair? The throne?
To colour the lamps or headlights, we shall use Imperial Fist contrast paint. We then apply the Imperial Fist to the white areas we painted in the previous step, again doing our best not to get any on the surrounding areas.
I find I need to wear glasses now to paint these little details. They do really help, and I thoroughly recommend them.
For the other lens, we shall be using Talisar Blue. We are not sure how to pronounce that correctly. It's another contrast paint. Like before, we use our steadiest hand to apply a thin coat of the Talamuk dark Merclarera. Like before, we use our steadiest hand to apply a thin coat of the Talsar blue to the lens, and of course, again, trying not to get it on the metal surround. Here are the Sentinels with those lenses colours blocked in. We just need to give them a little highlight now.
I'm surprised we managed to do them so neatly. If you know a good way of painting those metal grills and lamps, then please let us all know.
To highlight the lenses, we just mix a little white in with the original tint colours. For the yellow, we just dot in a little mix of white and Imperial Fist to the centre of the lamp lenses. Much the same for the blue, but obviously with a blue and white mix. With those highlights applied, the lenses are almost done. There's just one more step left to do.
We won't be doing that now, but we will be doing it later on.
Next up, it's Vallejo Model Colour Black, with the wrinkly label for reasons unknown.
Not for reasons unknown, I told you.
No, you didn't. With the black, we block in the Sentinel pilot's head-up display screens. Well, that's what I think they are. They might just be armour plates. The first colour will be Corn Red, and apparently that's named after a band. With the Corn Red, we paint the screens, leaving just a circle of black in the upper right corner. We need a brighter red next, and we shall use Flat Red. This one covers really well, unlike that Vermilion Red. We apply this red inside the previous Corn Red. We're working up a transition from black to our final highlight colour. Next up, it's Vallejo Orange Red. This one has a lid that keeps falling off. It needs replacing really, but I keep forgetting to do it. Again, like before, apply the orange inside the previous flat red areas. Our last colour will be white. With the white, we apply a dot highlight inside the centre of the orange and also in the top corner of the black circle we left, simulating a reflection. With all these stages applied, the screens now look like this. Pretty good, we think. Again, like the lenses, there's one more step left to apply.
Can you guess what it is? Answers on a postcard to the usual address.
Well, it's gloss varnish. We've had this bottle for years. It's lasting a long time. Using a crap brush, we then apply a thickish coat of gloss varnish to all those lenses, again doing our best not to get anywhere we shouldn't. The gloss takes a while to dry as it's quite thick, but you do get a nice glossy reflective finish to your lenses afterwards. Oh, by the way, we applied this to all the lamps, lenses and HUD screens. No clue what HUD stands for.
Some gloss varnishes are thinner than others, and they might need more coats. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of experimentation.
Now recently, Snakeworks Jr. and I took a trip to the local pet shop where they had these fish. He liked them, but I had no idea what they are. If there are any fish experts watching, then please let us know. Do they get huge? Are they savage? Who knows? Our next paint isn't a paint, but a shade, and that shade is Seraphim Sepia. Shady.
Is a shade considered a paint? I've never really thought about it. I'd say it probably was. Or is.
Using the Seraphim Sepia, we give the pistons and balls a wash. We leave the middle of the pistons clean but try to keep the sepia around the ends, like an accumulation of lubricating oil. I don't think it matters if you get the lube on the balls, but that's entirely up to you. I think the oily balls is a nice effect. To make it even better, it would be a good idea to mix a little gloss varnish in, or just buy the gloss version of the shade, if it still exists. We also take this opportunity to shade the golden aquixolars. This also adds a little depth to the gold.
Now I considered doing some NMM on these Sentinels, but I feel maybe a mix of styles wouldn't look quite right. Also I forgot.
Next up we return to our highest highlight mix, Russian green and pastel green. Using a sponge, we sponge on some chipping effects. We tried not to go overboard because what does the old saying say?
If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. Oh, hang on, no, that's the motto of the Ipswich Town Football Club. Hold on, let me look it up. Less is more.
Some Vallejo Dark Rust now. This one comes in a weird bottle. It looks like a knockoff or a bootleg. I wonder why that is. Again, we sponge on some of the dark rust to contrast our chipping effects. And again, we tried to be sparing as not to make the paint look a mess.
There's a balance when it comes to weathering. Too little and it looks too clean. Too much and it looks like a bloody mess. Or a Nurgle affiliated item.
Our last chipping colour is chrome. This is to simulate chips that make it through the paint and are fresh.
Did you say chicken?
Chipping! Marcel's always interrupting. Chrome covers really well, so it's important to blot a lot of the paint before commencing sponging. With the chrome chips applied With the chrome chips applied, is it supposed to be applied out?
No, just applied.
With the chrome chips applied, the chipping stage is all finished. Already they are starting to look nicely weathered. Well, I think so anyway. I also need to tell you all my husband is amazing. I didn't see that line coming. I also need to tell you all my husband is amazing. I love him so much. He's like a real life Superman.
Some people like their miniatures to look clean, while others like heavy weathering. I always find it depends on the miniature itself. And also the theme of the piece. I don't know why I did a Han Solo blaster pose for that.
I'm Han Solo, solo.
Next up, we're going to be using our orange paint with the wonky cap. After heavily thinning the orange with water, we dot some patches of orange around the Sentinel to simulate rust patches here and there. You can do little pin washes or streaks or whatever you fancy. Here's the results of the rust stage. Again, we tried to keep this to a minimum. Too much rust makes models look Nurgle, and nobody wants Nurgle.
I considered painting some Nurgle demons once, but then I realised every single other Chaos faction was better, especially Slaanesh.
Okay, fan favourite now, Agrax Earthshade. Using the Agrax Earthshade, we do a few choice pin washes and streaks, just picking a couple of rivets and panel lines per Sentinel.
A lot of people like to use oil paints for pin washing. Pin being short for pinpoint, by the way. A lot of people ask what pin in pin washing means. But like I said, my goal is to use easy and simple methods going forward, so I don't have to mess about with the thinners and the oil. But if you fancy coming to chat about methods of painting, then please feel free to come along and join our friendly Discord server, which is not behind a paywall. There's a link to that in the description below and one up here somewhere. We look forward to chatting to you there.
We return now to Seraphim Sepia. Like before, we panel line, recess shade and streak some choice areas with the sepia. This adds a little variety to the colours, adding a hint of realism to the weathering. Also, if the orange from the rust stage was overpowering at any point, we can just go over it with the sepia, dulling it down. Here we can see the Sentinels with the weathering applied. We've also done some heat bloom or staining on the melter gun barrels, and we've also done the basing in a new style, which we shall be showing in a separate video.
If you would like to see a guide on how we did the heat staining on those melter barrels, then please let me know and we'll get on that ASAP, or ASP as my old friend Carl would say.
Now while we put our paints away, I just want to give a huge loving shout out to all our loving Patreon supporters and channel members. Dan Yallop, Lee Blackley, Donald, Pine Tree, Bobzilla, Charles Marlowe, Andrew Merrington, Nick Ellingham, Bryson Bantams, Timbo, Sven V, and our newest member, SDKFZ Forge World. Thank you all so much for supporting us. If you want your name in lights and read out by me, Mrs. Snakeworks, then you can sign up using any of the links in the description below. We love you all.
We really do.
To finish the Sentinels off, we have to do some rimming. The colour we like to use is Scale 75 Black as it's nice and matte. Using the black, we then commence the rimming process. We find that 2 thin coats gives a smoother finish than 1 thick one. Rough rims don't look great.
Also, we much prefer the matte look to our rim as opposed to the glossy, shiny ones. The glossy ones just look too toy-like to me, but that is just a personal preference. But before we do that, I just want to show you this. In the Anfelian Project book, you'll see there's a trigon on the front, but just underneath it, next to this gene stealer here, it says, if you're enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, Chris. And remember, Mrs. Snakeworks has said that when we hit 25,000 subscribers, we're allowed to order a Reaver Titan. So please smash that subscribe button and we can hit that target ASAP. If you are enjoying the content on the channel, then please consider joining us on Patreon or becoming a channel member. The link to those are in the description below or up here somewhere. Now anyway, without further ado, let's check out the finished article, shall we?
And with the rims painted, the Elysian D99 Sentinels are complete. They didn't take too long to do and were rather easy.
These were great fun to paint and we think they have come out really well. They should look good on the table.
We think our goal of painting these well without using an airbrush was achieved, but at the end of the day, that's subjective, so please let us know what you guys think.
We are big fans of the weathering and can't wait to test it out on some more Elysians.
Yeah.
Okay. We are big fans of the weathering and can't wait to test it out on some more Elysian D99 vehicles. We can't wait to see you then.
Love you, bye.
If you want to see some more D99 themed videos, then check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching.